My favorite part about my job.
And so my favorite part of the job.
The best part about my job.
The best part about my job.
Best part of my job.
The best part of my job.
Best part of my job.
Best part of my job.
Best part about my job.
Best part of my
the
job.
best parts about my job.
The best part about my job.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Best Part of My Job podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and the Best Part of My Job podcast is a weekly exploration of the world of work, where each week we talk to professionals in different fields to learn a little bit more about what they do, how they chose that career, how one advances in that type of career, and also any wisdom they might have for people that are interested in following a similar path. And I'm very excited about our guest today, which is a good friend of mine, William Tincup. William, how are you?
I'm doing great, Lars. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. So we were recording this on a Monday morning, air date TBD, but we're both caffeinated and ready to go. So, William is somebody who I've been following for quite some time in our space. He has a really interesting background that cuts across a variety of things, from HR to technology to marketing to being an entrepreneur and starting and selling different companies. So he has a lot of wisdom we're going to be able to tap into over the next 30 minutes. And William, I want to turn it over to you as we get started. And let's just start with you perhaps giving a bit of an overview on your background.
Sure. I came up through retail. You'll find a lot of people either kind of come up through restaurants and food service, or people come up through grocery and retail. And this, a lot of folks that have the service background, and the customer's always right. So I worked for Albertsons for 3 years in the grocery industry, and then 4.5 years for Walmart back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I came up that way, where you worked hard, bagging groceries, getting tips for delivering groceries and all this kind of stuff, and you kind of, is very hierarchical. Retail, very hierarchical. You start at the bottom, you move your way up, and you slog it out, and through promotions and making your boss look great or whatever, you get promoted. At one point at Walmart, I was about to, this is probably 91, I was about to get my own store. And so I was one of the golden children, if you will, of Walmart. And I was about to get my store, and I was like, 19, 20 years old. And my college career had never really taken off. Like, I tried to do college while working, which I would definitely give the advice to anyone listening to not do both, not try to do both at maximum. Like, I was trying to take, 15 hours and work 100 hours at work. And so I was academically suspended from 4 junior colleges. It just never really panned out. And then, so I'm about to get my own store, and things are about to take off. Basically what that meant at Walmart back then is you work at Walmart for 25 years and you retire. And that's it. Yeah. And so I was about to kind of make that commitment, and I kind of balked. I called my parents, told them I wanted to go to school, thought I was missing out on college, and they said, they're very supportive. They said, hey, come live with us and go back to college. And they were living in Birmingham at the time. And so I quit. Left Walmart with, basically I gave them 6 months notice, so it's not like I just left them in a lurch. Right. But I moved in with my mom and dad, and I went to the University of Alabama, got an art history degree, 3 years, then got married, and then went to University of Arizona for 3 years, and did a master's degree in American Indian Studies. And then after that, I did an MBA. So 8 years of college, which kind of tells you a little bit about my personality. 8 years of college and 3 degrees. Later, I then entered the job market.
So you're on career number 3 at this point.
Yeah. I tell people, you've only got so many industries that you can learn in a career. At one point, you just kind of you get tired of relearning, because it always takes about 5 years to learn an industry. Right. And I learned the retail industry, and then I learned the industry of art history and kind of the curatorial museum studies. That was a fascinating kind of industry. And then while I did my master's in Native American studies, I learned a lot about Native American art and culture and the intersection points of how that works. And repatriation was kind of my specialty of how we look at ancient works and then how do we give them back to the people that are still existing today.
Right.
So I learned that industry. And then after all of that, get out of business school, to get dropped right into web development, interactive in the late 90s, which was basically how do you teach people how to become web-oriented? So back then, it's so ubiquitous now that, okay, www.whatever.com, but back then in the late 90s, people weren't on the web.
Right.
So you had to actually teach people like, hey, the internet. It'll change your life. You'll get sales. Things will happen. I felt like a huckster, like I was selling snake oil. Like, you too can be on the internet.
www.potion.com.
Hey, pretty much, right? So I did that, and I had to learn that industry, which at the time was a really good time to learn the internet, if you will, and internet marketing and SEO and all that hoopla. And then once I created my own firm, I did that with a partner. And we started what became Tincup, but we started that in 1999. And so I did that for, good God, I did that for a little over a decade. And so I learned marketing, agency life, different. It's like whenever you have an ad agency, think of it as Led Zeppelin. So think of, you're on this tour, going through life, and everything's great. And, there's off times, and there's bad times too. But it's really like Led Zeppelin. You're just touring, having fun, doing whatever the hell you want. And then I left that in 2010. Mm-hmm. And so I'm on my fifth industry, which is really the HR software and the intersection points of research and HR and technology. And so I'm at the beginning stages again. I keep having to learn the same stuff over, but I'm at the beginning stages. And at 46, I think I've clicked. I finally it's coming together insofar as I'm very comfortable. I'm not just very comfortable in the industry. I've been comfortable in the industry for a while, but I'm comfortable in doing research,
right,
and being curious about not having all the answers.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that because I know you and John Sumser came together to start Key Interval Research, and so tell me a little bit about kind of what Key Interval does now, and actually, maybe before you answer that, how did the two of you come together?
Well, it's interesting. When I left Tincup, I basically wanted to consult, and Brett and I did a 3-year buyout, whereas I got a check every month for 3 years. And it was great because I didn't have to work. I could basically kind of figure myself out, figure out my next step, and so I was consulting. So I did work. Ironically, I didn't just travel the planet and do all that stuff. I actually worked.
You did it wrong.
Yeah. Now that I've said that out loud, I'm like, whoa.
Like, wait a minute, this is a huge mistake.
Yeah. What was that old joke? I sent you a fireman, a rabbi, and a police officer. What else do you need? So I worked and I consulted. But I was consulting back then. I was consulting on user adoption because I'd fallen in love with this idea that you could get people to use software. Like you could figure it out, like these are levers that you had to pull, and you could pull the levers and you could get people to use software. And so I did that for about 40 vendors. And it was all kinds of stuff, like when the bell rings and you sell something, what happens internally? How do you do organizational change? How do you do communications? And it was fun. It was actually really fun consulting. Well, and John's always been an independent, kind of like Bill Kudik and Naomi Bloom. He's always been an independent.
Yeah.
And he threw me on a project. Like he was probably the 5th call I got when I left Tincup, and he just said, "Hey, congratulations, good luck. Well, let's look for places where we can do some stuff together." Blah 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 blah. Well, a couple months later, he called me up and just said, "Hey, I've got this project I'm working on. I think it'd be fun for us to do something together." And he threw me in on a project. We did work together. I did the same thing. I landed a gig, pulled him in on that project. We did that for about 3 years, where we were just pulling each other in on projects. Like, he'd still have independent projects, and I'd still have independent projects or retainer clients, but we'd pull each other in. Well, at one point, we were like, we represent most of the revenue that each other has. Like, why don't we just do something there? But knowing John as the way as you do, and myself, we were skittish about putting something legitimate together. Like, what is it? Is it a consulting firm? Is it an agency? Is it an agency plus? Like, we don't want to do any of that stuff. We don't. It was commitment issues. We don't want to do any of that. The market doesn't need another, some more of that. Let's just kind of go and do work together and keep it kind of, amorphous, if you will. Just kind of keep it out there. So we did that for a year. And what we realized, and this is something I think is great market advice for folks, is at one point, you can keep telling the market what you think that you are or that you do and what you do well. But at one point, you have to listen to the market. And the market will tell you what you are and where you serve and actually what price you need to be at and all that other stuff. So the market was telling us that we were analysts. And we behaved like analysts. Like, the projects that we had become kind of known for behind the scenes were competitive research, customer research, all of this research that we were doing behind the veil. We weren't behaving like an Aberdeen or IDC or Forrester or Gartner in the way that they do publicly facing research.
Right.
So that kicked off 1,000 conversations. Like, okay, well, what if we actually became analysts? Or what does that look like? Well, neither of us come from a traditional research background, so of course we got to learn research. Which there's definitely a slope to that. But actually understanding the market, understanding technology, and like that, none of the market issues became kind of created anxiety for John and I. It was all the research. How do you do great qualitative? How do you do great quantitative? How do you run focus groups? That stuff, yes. Yeah, I still have. I'll probably have anxiety for that for the next 7 years. But it wasn't the market stuff. Like, okay, there's a new ATS. Okay, all right, let me take a look at it. Let me see where it fits. Blah blah blah. That's easy. So we did about a year ago. We just started talking. Every night we'd get on a Google Doc and what about this? What about that? Well, let's map the universe. Well, okay, what is mapping? What does that look like? And so we started getting into cartography and, how do we actually explore things without acting like we know? Like I think that's one of the things that I think John and I really liked about becoming analysts is, like, we don't have all the answers.
Right.
And a lot of the analysts in our space, they act like they have the answers. And it frustrates me on a lot of levels. It's like, well, I know you don't have the answers because there's no way you can have the answers. So there's that. But also this godlike complex of, like, somehow mystically you know more than other people. Yeah, that's just it's a con.
Right.
And I've been the marketer that said I don't believe in analysts because I don't believe anybody can be independent and objective. How do you forget your experiences? How do you forget what people have told you? Like, hey, that's just it's bullshit. So I called bullshit on it. And then as I became an analyst, I started to realize, okay, I can't be that guy. I can't be godlike, which means that I've got to be curious. And so John and I use the metaphor of Lewis and Clark in a lot of ways that, hey, we're going to go explore. We're going to go west of the Mississippi. We might find some dragons or snakes or people with 3 eyes. We have no idea. But we'll come back. We'll tell you what we found. And that's the basis of the research is that we're going to go and explore. We're going to come back and we're going to validate some things we probably already knew. We're going to demystify or debunk some things that we thought were actually true and come to find out after you do research, they're not true. So we come back to the audience and we then render the research and say, here's what we found. So the research is all written for practitioners. So it's not written for vendors. It's written for, people that are actually doing the job of recruiting in HR.
Right. Okay. And where did the name Key Interval Research come from?
So the key and the key and the interval are the two most important parts of a map.
Yep. Okay.
And so that's it was
Interesting.
It was our fourth name. We had looked at several other names before that. We got to key interval, and it was the domain was available, keyinterval.com, and everything else was available. We're like, you know what, this is fantastic. And so we use key interval research, but just like Forrester, which Forrester's name is Forrester Research,
Right.
But at this point, in their storied history, no one calls them Forrester Research anymore. They just call them Forrester. And so we know that at one point the research part of our name will be dropped.
Right.
And so it'll just be key interval. And that'll take a couple of years and probably some significant hiring and success for that to happen. But, we don't want to just build a two-person shop.
Right.
And that was a very important series of conversations for us, is that, we're not interested in just building a lifestyle business. I've had lifestyle businesses, and they're great. It's when you try to make a lifestyle business something that it's not, is when you usually fail. And so if you start off with the idea that, no, we want to hire people, we actually want to do great research, and we want this to be a business that survives both of us.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think I want to actually rewind a little bit to the lifestyle business, and that may have been perhaps even the early days of Star Tincup, before that kind of grew, and you ended up transitioning out and kind of selling off your ownership. I want to talk about that experience for a little bit, because being somebody who is obviously, you spent 10 years there, living the Led Zeppelin life, building something, having fun doing it, and then transitioning on. Like, what is that experience like to spend 10 years kind of building something and then transition on? And I guess also doing it in a way where the organization itself still exists.
Well, it's better.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to. I worked with a guy in Grand Prairie, Texas, a long time ago. His name was Jim George. And at the time, I was probably working 110 hours a week. And he walked the store with me, and he's, my goal is to get to about 30, 35 hours a week, and play golf a lot of the time, and do the Rotary, and do Knights of Columbus and stuff like that. And I looked at him, and it was like he was speaking French. Like I couldn't understand, because I was so into work, and I wanted to be there the whole time. And he looked at me, he goes, "Here's the deal. It's got to work without you. In fact, it's got to work better without you than with you. It can't be because you're there that it works." And it stuck with me for years. And I think with Brett and I's transition, 5 years later, it's really easy to kind of look back on. You have to have a great partner.
Yep.
And Brett Starr, there is no better partner out there for this transition. He was magnificent, because we didn't start with how do you get out, or how do you do a buyout, or anything like that. We started with his wife was pregnant, and he and I were wrapped up in the business. I was in sales and marketing, he was in customer stuff, and if I died, the business went away. And if he died, the business went away. And that terrified both of us. And so we started looking at key man insurance, and what do we do if your wife dies, or what if you die? And we created a buyout. And we did it up on a wipe-off board where we created a buyout. We sat down, and he looked at me, he goes, "What do you think?" I said, "I want to do that." And he goes, "Okay, well, let's figure it out." And 9 days later, my lawyer, his lawyer, corporate lawyer, everybody had agreed. The agreement was done, and I was out. It was that easy. Now, the subtext of that is we had been through a bad buyout from a previous partner. So I had started the company with another guy named Brian, and we got up to a point, and we brought Brett in 2003, and then we worked together for a couple of years, and it was the other guy went through kind of a messy divorce, and just he was in a bad way, and it was one of those deals like a band. The drummer's not working out.
Right.
You know what I mean? I tell entrepreneurs about this all the time. That it's like, it is a band.
Right.
You can act like it's not a band, but it is a band. So what do you do when the drummer's not working out? Well, you get a new drummer. Or you got to tell the drummer that he's no longer a part of the gig, and he's got to go do something else. So that was a really terrible buyout. I mean, it got legal. He held stock. It was just messy. It was like one of those divorces that you hear about, like terrible. So we had been through that traumatic experience, which I think set us both up to be really, really good in this buyout experience because I didn't want to hurt him. He didn't want to hurt me. We both probably, whenever you look at a buyout, he probably will reflect on it and think that he paid too much. And I'll probably reflect on it and think that he paid too little, which is the sign of a good buyout. Right? That's a healthy sign. But he treated me really well, paid that's like 37 payments. Every single payment was paid on time. Like I didn't have to worry about the fluctuations of am I going to get a check this month or whatever. And so he kept me whole. A buyout went perfectly, and the business is better. Star Conspiracy is better without me than it ever was with me. And I think that's the sign. I think that Jim George, advice. The business has got to go on. It's got to go on and do stuff without you and actually flourish.
Right.
And so oftentimes, you want your ex-girlfriend to get in a car crash. You don't want her to hit the lottery. You don't want her to go and marry the movie star and, see her on the Emmys. You want her to be in a fiery car crash. And that's not really the right way to approach it, especially in buyouts.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that because I've always found that interesting. I mean, especially in our space, you're seeing more people become entrepreneurs and start companies. And a lot of times they're doing it as a solo. I mean, I'm, an illustration of that as well. But I've always been kind of curious when people do form partnerships, kind of how they set that up. And if that, that thing happens at some point where they go separate ways or one person wants to do something else, like how is that typically handled? So it's interesting to hear.
Well, if you were to ever look for a partner, go back to when you and your wife first got together.
Yep.
And all of that stuff, like how are we gonna agree? Where do we see the world differently? Like all that stuff, you're getting married again. And so a business partnership, especially something that's 50-50, it is a marriage.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about, who's male, who's female or any of that other stuff, but it is a marriage. And so what do you think of in a natural marriage? But I think you can worry about all a lot of entrepreneurs have been burned by this. And so they think about what happens when things go badly and the worst case scenario. And I tend to kind of look at it and say, you know what? Most smart people that are able can go and create something else. If they can create this, they can create something else. So stop spending all your intellect thinking about what happens when things go badly. Just talk, and I think it's important to commit to how you want to work and how you want to communicate and what you're building and have a shared vision for what you want to build together, and then just go build it. And as it gets to a certain point, just kind of recommitting to that vision or changing the vision together of what you want to build, and things generally work out. And if they don't work out, well, what's the worst? You get kicked out? Well, go build something else. It's not like someone dies.
Right.
And
what I want to jump back into your current role one more time, and then I'm going to actually transition to a couple things outside of just kind of day to day. But as an analyst, what does your typical week look like? Or maybe there is no typical week, but what does an average week look like for you in terms of kind of what you're doing?
Oh, well, so you got multiple things. We've got a report a month that we're pushing out, and we've had to do a rewrite on one report because we just didn't like the output. And so things are a little bit slow. So there's the marketing of reports, there's selling, research, which I can tell you is not easy. There's nothing easy about selling research. So I'm on a lot of calls, doing a lot of briefings, looking at other people's software, giving them advice on what to do and what not to do. I'm selling research, selling consulting, selling advising, all that stuff. And I'm also helping John on the research side with forming the next survey for the next research, reviewing the current for the results from the current survey and reviewing the edited work of the next report. So John and I kind of split the house in a way that makes it easier for both of us. I go sell, and he'll go do research.
Yeah.
And every day we talk, like every other good marriage, we talk every day. Even if it's about nothing, we just get on the phone. Hey, how you doing? How's your day? What's going on? What about this? How about that? I saw the email from so-and-so, and we just talk. And but the day-to-day, I don't have the same 2 days twice.
Right.
Because some days are more laden with sales calls, and some days are, like today, outside of this call, I'll have 7 briefings. And so it's just technology companies that want to put their technology in front of me. And I want to see it. Like, that's the thing about being an analyst. You got to be curious about software and innovation and what's working and what doesn't work. And because I've had the background of a marketer, I can kind of cut through the marketing shtick. Like a lot of people will, they're just buzzwords. They
Right.
might not even know the industry, but they're like, okay, recruiters can source and da-da-da-da. It's like, okay, dial that down. Just dial all those words down. Just show me what it does. And then
This is a synergistic approach to common sourcing challenges.
Yeah. Well, you get the same stuff. So it's like, okay, yeah, just dial the rhetoric down. I assume that I kind of understand what a sourcer does. Okay, yeah, let's move on. And then you have other people that come from the software side of things that don't know anything about the industry, and they just want you to look at software. So what I do with those folks is like I kind of do the opposite of what the person wants me to do, just because I want to see them in that scenario. So when they go fast, I go slow.
Yeah.
When they go slow, I go fast. So when they want to show me software, I want to hear the story. And when they want to tell me the story, I want to see software. So I'm always kind of pushing people to do the thing that's uncomfortable for them, because that's the edges. I want to see the edges of what works and what doesn't work. And with startups that I've fallen in love with, it's the entrepreneur, it's the technology, and it's the market opportunity. But I've got to fall in love with all three. And I think that's not just unique to me. I think that's a lot of people.
What's your recent loves? What are some companies that you think are doing some really cool stuff?
I think we've talked about employee engagement for 150 years, and I've always thought it was a con. Like I've always kind of approached employee engagement and said, yeah, this is just a shrewd way to get people to work more and pay them less. And so we're going to, have the foosball table that no one ever uses because they feel guilty for playing foosball. Or if they're they're found playing foosball, then we work them a little harder because we feel like they're playing at work. So I just don't believe in it, but I believe that there are a lot of things that are coming about to put analytics around engagement that I kind of like. I like that, like Glint, and I think Jason Lawrenson's doing some great work over there in that space. But there's a lot of movement over there to make it more science, so less of a voodoo, more of a science. And as it becomes more of a science, then I'm going to give it a break. And like, okay, all right, well, if you can tell me who is going to stay and who we are getting value out of it, and maybe a diminished return, I'm kind of interested about that. I am interested to know flight risk. I am interested to understand, when people want to leave a job, that there's things that they do and behaviors that happen. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that. Yeah. So technologies that play there are kind of interesting to me right now, because I think it solves how do we retain top talent?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I've seen some interesting developments in the space too. And I think when the marketers stop shouting big data at us and actually start showing us how to use what I would, little data is about to be in the same family as big data, but actually just database decision. Like you can track sentiment, you can track kind of pulse checking your staff to kind of see where they are and kind of how that trends over time and different business drivers that might be influencing that. So I think that's I agree. That's a good thing to be able to get that and not have just the anecdotal, what's your culture, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of a culture fit has become in the last couple of years this thing. Well, but no one really knows what culture fit means. Like that's the funny thing about culture fit. You ask 10 people to define culture fit, especially even at one company. Say, hey, define culture fit. They all define it differently.
Yeah, I think culture fit in a lot of organizations is a cop out to say no. Mm-hmm. To hires, right? It's I don't have a good reason why this person wouldn't be a good fit, so I'm just going to use the culture card.
Yeah.
And,
You want
and people aren't going to challenge the culture card like, oh, okay, well, we can't work against that.
No one wants a poison pill. Like, fear? Are we really using fear?
Yeah.
Poison pill? Yeah. I think it's worse than what we think, because I think people get in social recruiters and sourcers and they look everything up about a person, and then they don't reach whatever criteria that we want, and then we use culture fit as a way to say no.
Right.
But we're skirting, all kinds of laws there, all kinds of hiring protections.
Oh, yeah.
Things like that, because instead of saying, well, once I looked her up and she was doing a bunch of keg stands on Facebook, I decided that we probably shouldn't interview her. Well, what does that have to do with competence? What does that have to do with anything? And she's not a culture fit.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, you're making assumptions based on moments of time with no context.
That's right. That's right. And there's laws in place that are there
right.
for a reason, because we've learned over the years that, we're just going to hire people like us because it's easy. I mean, that's bias that exists with every, hiring person. It's easier, and homogeneity is easier.
Sure.
Like, that's what people don't get. It's like, well, diversity is important. Well, diversity creates conflict. Conflict creates friction, and friction's tough.
Yeah.
No one likes friction. I mean, there's a better output. Yeah, we could all. I mean, pretty much anyone that's logical gets that. There's better output, but it's harder to get to.
Yeah, and let me ask, one of the things that I'm curious about, the first time we actually met was a talent net in Chicago in 2010 maybe. But I think for some reason, the memory that sticks with me when I think back at that conference was Seiden was presenting, and you had a question or a point or something. I don't remember what it was. You were sitting in the back with Charney, and there's probably at least 3 fucks in the question, and but they were really well placed. They weren't for effect. It wasn't for, and I think that obviously got my attention, because I was like, all right, who is this guy? And it was a smart question with a well-positioned use of fucks. But I think since then, I've read a lot of your writings. We've had a chance to talk, quite a bit. And I've always, one of the things that comes to mind when I think of you is just kind of fearless, right? Like you have no problem being, and again, authentic is a buzzword. I'm not going to use that, but what you see is what you get with you. And I think that there's a degree of fearlessness in that, of just being completely comfortable in your own skin. And I'm wondering, where does that come from?
Failure.
Yeah.
It comes from failure. Like a lot of people that kind of get to a place where they're comfortable in their own skin, it's because they at one point realize that failure is when they're not.
Yeah.
When I put on a 3-piece suit and I don't curse, or I'm not myself in any of the ways that it would be that way, where it breaks. Like, that's what I've learned about myself, is that when I'm trying to be somebody else, or what somebody else's rendering of what I should be, that's just wrought with failure. But when I'm myself, and again, I don't think no one is 100% authentic.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is, if I were 100% authentic all the time, I would drive every single person away from me. Like, seriously, I would drive because you don't want to know the dark crevices of my mind. Like Dexter, not that. That's easy. That's kids play. Like, you don't want to know those things.
Right.
You don't want to know those things. And so it's always a version of the authenticity that's put in front. And it's the kind of, how do you get closer to this place that's always fluid and always moving, and it's always moving away from you, where it's easier, especially as you age, it's easier to be other people's rendering.
Right.
Because that's where judgment comes in. That's where biases come in. That's where all kinds of bigotry and everything else comes in. I've gotten to a point where I've realized I'm not, when you're mainstream, you have to be all things to all people.
Sure.
You've got to be able to navigate everyone's issues and needs, and then be someone that really never offends, because if you offend, you automatically cut off an audience.
Right.
And so what I've learned about that is, like, okay, I'm never going to be mainstream. I'm just never, it's not because I can't, I guess on some level it is, but it's it's because I see what it takes to be that, and I don't want to give up being myself. And myself is brutally honest with myself, brutally honest, and also with others. So when someone comes to me and says something that's semi-retarded, I'll say, would you fucking think before you talk? Because that's I mean, are you drunk? Are you stupid? What the fuck happened today? I mean, So I'm the guy that'll say that, not trying to hurt them. Not doing it in a mean-spirited way, but doing it in a way that I want you to hold me accountable.
Right.
When I say something stupid, I want you to tell me. And that's the deal we have together. But I'm going to do that to you, and I'm never going to have an off button. So I don't get a lot of people call me. I don't get a lot of unsolicited drive time phone calls where people are like, hey, I just wanted to catch up, because I don't have that gear that can, hey, let's talk about the weather, or, who's doing well in sports. I don't have that gear.
Right.
So it's always on, and it's always harsh. And so cursing and inappropriate and all the other stuff that I broker in, it's just a way to filter people in and out.
Right.
So if someone's completely turned off by cursing, it's because they haven't gotten to a point emotionally where they can separate substance and style. And if someone will ever make the trade-off of they'll choose style over substance, then I don't want to know them.
Right. Right.
I'm using a filter to filter them away from me. And so those are all cleverly placed to filter people like, oh, yeah, he said the word motherfucker. It's like, yeah, I did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I did. and I did it purposely. So if you're offended, that's cool, but that's a you issue. That's not a me issue.
Right.
So I think the thing is there's trade-offs. And this is the advice I'd give to people coming off is that there are trade-offs these are all logical, rational decisions. And when you make these logical and rational decisions, they have consequences. And you will cut yourself off of deals. You will cut yourself out of opportunities. I mean, there's probably 5 companies that came after me for a job after I left Start Tincup. And if I would have been a more conservative person, there would have been, 25 companies that came after me.
Right.
But the companies that came after me already understood, okay, there's some baggage with this guy. There's brilliance. That's a little bit overblown, but there's the good and the bad, we should just say.
Right.
Whereas with somebody that's a little bit more conservative, they would just look at the good. And so there are consequences, and there's consequences to all of our actions and everything we say. And so you got to actually weave that into, are you willing to deal with the consequences of having less friends or having less business opportunities or whatever? And if you are, great. If you're not, then don't. Find a way to get comfortable in your own skin being more conservative, because no one's completely honest. No one's completely authentic. No one. There isn't a human being alive that is completely authentic. It's all versions. It's all degrees of which, or on some type of like the autism spectrum. It's some type of spectrum, and the authenticity spectrum, you're never at 100%.
No, I think you're right. And I think that it's actually a great point that you raised, because I think that there are organizations that, and it's almost, I hate kind of tying this back to a business kind of thing, but like, when you talk about things like employer branding, too many times we get hung up on this idea of talent attraction. And that's only half of it. It's both attraction and repelling. You want an organization to be able to be as kind of real as it can, and that's not going to be for everyone. And much like kind of how I think every individual is going to handle themselves, the more real you are, the more people will either be drawn to that because that's something that they really find common ground with you on, or it will cost you some opportunities in some cases if again, companies are looking for someone to be more conservative. So I think you're definitely right on that. And it's good to hear your perspective, just because I think that you, if you're looking at this on an autism spectrum standpoint, you're far on one end, and I personally dig that. I've always respected that about you, and so I appreciate you sharing kind of where that comes from. What the last question I want to leave you with, and this is something that I like to kind of close with a lot of people in different fields, because it's something that I'm curious about, and I like to learn more about how where different professions find this. But where do you find inspiration?
I find inspiration on a couple levels. I find inspiration in our industry, within our industry, is people learning and people struggling with stuff. Like I like people that, and all the same folks I know, but the people that struggle with stuff.
Yeah.
Like that, you can see them openly. I have this issue. I don't have the answers. I'm struggling with. I can see this. I can see that. Like I like that. Whenever you get the blog post or the article that is the 7 things to win at so and so, I automatically just like I just it's the Huffington Post or LinkedInization of content. I just hate that stuff, and I don't think there's a whole lot of value in it because there's no struggle. That the old struggles of writing a man versus man, man versus spirit, man versus the earth. Like I like the struggle, and I like people that are willing to come at the struggle and say, I don't have the answers. I'm struggling with. Employer brand is a great one. Instead of people pontificating the answer, which of course there is no fucking answer.
Exactly.
Well, the answer is so unique to that company at that time for those positions that it becomes not a best case, not something that's a best practice, which I think the search for best practices is ludicrous anyhow. But the thing is when people struggle with like the articles that are, hey, here's some things that are working in employer brand and here's some things that are failing in employer brand, and they bring the both of them together and say, this is a real struggle. It's a struggle that I'm going through. That's where I get inspiration. So long story short, I get inspiration when people struggle or when they write about their struggle. And so I look for those types of content, and I think the other layer of inspiration for me is my 2 boys. I've got a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and looking through their eyes at what they see is just fascinating. Like not trying to control it, but letting them come to it on their own and see things is just. I don't know. It's hard not to be inspired by that. But inside of our industry, I think I look for things that are the struggle, and then outside of the industry, I just look at my kids.
Great. Well, that's good. William, I really appreciate you taking the time to join the show and letting me pick your brain a little bit.
Absolutely, bro. This was fun.
Yeah, man. So what, for people who may want to follow up with you or connect with you after the show, what's the best way for people to do that?
Lars, I'm on the internet.
Wait, is that www?
Yeah. Capital I. Yeah. So yeah, just Google me. Twitter's easy, William Tincup. But yeah, just Google me. I'm really easy to find.
All right, and when your line of TC merchandise comes out, make sure you've got a good storefront to that as well.
Right.
I love that. That's that we have to do a best part bonus show or after dark to get into that, because that's actually, quick question, with Key Interval, does the TC clothing line continue?
No.
It's retired.
It is retired.
Oh, okay.
Retired. I didn't want to create brand confusion.
I see.
I didn't want to create that confusion, so I had to sunset a brand. Bring another brand online.
The marketer DNA is just it's come up. Yes,
you can't escape who you are. I mean, this is Madonna 101. You got to keep kind of every 4 or 5 years refresh the brand, put something new into the marketplace. But yeah, I it's one of the things that I made with John when we first started doing work together. I'm like, I have no ego. There's no ego tied to any of this stuff. When we do stuff together and when we both are committed, we do something publicly facing, I'm all in. And he's all in. So it's like, we're going to go all in and we're going to go and make this thing work. And so you can't have you can't create confusion. Even from something as stupid as, hats and T-shirts, you can't create confusion in the marketplace.
All right. Well, so one day in a couple of years from now, when Key Interval is massive, there may be a charity sell-off of old TC gear.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good, brother. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care.